What is that?
Stay in your seats, everybody. Stay quiet.
It's just standing there.
I see it. Don't look up. Just hold still.
Leo Vance would never forget the sound of that first boulder hitting the windshield. The explosion was not like anything he had ever heard before, not a car accident or a falling tree, or anything his mind could have prepared him for. It was the sound of stone meeting glass at terminal velocity, a sharp crack followed immediately by the cascading tinkle of 1,000 safety glass fragments separating from their bonding layer and spraying inward like crystalline rain. The entire windshield, which moments before had been a clear barrier between Leo and the mountain road ahead, suddenly transformed into an opaque spiderweb of fractures that obscured his vision completely. But worse than the sound of breaking glass was the screaming of metal as the boulder's impact transferred kinetic energy through the bus's frame, causing structural members to bend and twist beyond their design tolerances. The bus shuddered like a living thing in pain, and Leo felt that vibration travel up through the steering wheel, into his hands, into his arms, into his chest, where it seemed to make his heart stutter. The sudden weightlessness as the bus lurched toward the cliff edge was the most primal terror Leo had ever experienced. His inner ear, that ancient system that keeps humans upright and oriented, registered the wrongness immediately. The floor was no longer level. The world was no longer stable. Gravity, which had been a constant friend pressing him reliably into his seat, suddenly became an enemy pulling him toward death. His stomach tried to climb into his throat. His hands gripped the steering wheel with crushing force, knuckles white, tendons standing out like steel cables under the skin. He tried to correct, tried to turn left, tried to do something, anything, but the bus was not responding the way it should. Something fundamental in the mechanical linkage between the steering wheel and the front wheels had been damaged or destroyed, and his inputs were producing only sluggish, inadequate responses. He would never forget the face he saw on the ridge above. For just an instant, backlit by the afternoon sun that was beginning its descent toward the western peaks, a shape was visible that Leo's brain initially refused to process. It was too large to be a bear standing upright, too broad to be a human even accounting for heavy winter clothing, too purposeful in its posture to be a tree stump or shadow or any of the other rational explanations his mind frantically offered. The figure stood perhaps 8 feet tall, maybe more, with shoulders so wide they seemed almost grotesque in their proportions. The body was covered in dark fur that ruffled in the mountain breeze, and even from this distance, even through the shattered windshield and his own mounting panic, Leo could see the musculature beneath that fur, could see the bunching and flexing of muscles that suggested terrible strength. But it was the eyes that Leo would remember most clearly, would see in his nightmares for years to come. They were small relative to the massive head, set deep under a pronounced brow ridge that gave the face a perpetually angry expression, and they were watching the bus with focused intensity, with clear awareness, with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. These were not the eyes of a frightened animal. These were the eyes of a predator that had successfully trapped its prey. In the 47 seconds between the first impact and the moment the bus stopped moving, Leo Vance experienced every shade of terror the human mind is capable of processing. There was the initial shock, that fraction of a second when the brain has not yet caught up to what the senses are reporting, when reality seems to pause and offer one last moment of innocence before everything changes. There was the recognition, the horrible clarity of understanding what was happening and what it meant. The moment when "this is an emergency" became "I am going to die." There was the desperate, frantic attempt to fix the situation, the surge of adrenaline that made time seem to slow down and senses become preternaturally sharp. The belief that if he just tried hard enough, was skilled enough, was strong enough, he could somehow reverse the physics that were dragging them toward the void. There was the acceptance, cold and final, when he realized that his efforts were useless, that the bus was going over the cliff, that everyone aboard was about to plunge hundreds of feet to the rocks and water below, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to prevent it. And finally, impossibly, there was the faint ember of hope that flickered when the bus stopped, when the rear wheels caught on something and held, when death retreated just far enough to make survival seem possible again. The creature that threw those boulders was not hiding anymore. Leo understood this with absolute certainty, though he could not have explained how he knew. There are instincts buried deep in the human brain, holdovers from when our ancestors were prey animals that had to interpret the intentions of predators through subtle cues of posture and movement. Those instincts were screaming at Leo now, filling him with the knowledge that the attack was deliberate, purposeful, personal. The creature had chosen to reveal itself. It had chosen to attack this particular vehicle at this particular time, in this particular place. It was hunting, and the hunt was not about food or territory or self-defense. The hunt was about dominance and elimination and sending a message written in violence and terror. And when the bus finally came to rest, with its front wheels hanging over a 500-foot drop into the whispering gorge, suspended in an impossible balance that could not last more than minutes at most, Leo realized with cold certainty that the falling rocks were not the end of their nightmare. They were just the beginning. The creature was still there on the ridge above them, still watching, still in control of the situation. It had the high ground, the element of surprise, overwhelming physical strength, and home terrain advantage. The humans were trapped in a metal box that was barely clinging to the earth, injured and terrified and helpless. The hunt was not over. The creature was simply deciding how it wanted to finish what it had started. What happened on that remote stretch of mountain road in the Cascade Mountains of Washington would haunt every survivor for the rest of their lives. But no one would ever believe them. Their stories would be dismissed as hallucinations brought on by trauma, as misidentifications of natural phenomena, as the product of stress and fear and the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. The physical evidence would be interpreted to support a narrative of accidental rockslide and driver error, a tragedy caused by bad luck and aging infrastructure rather than deliberate violence from an impossible creature. And gradually, as months turned to years, the survivors would learn to stop talking about what they had seen, would learn to accept the polite skepticism and pitying looks, would learn to keep their truth locked away where it could not harm their credibility or their sanity. But knowing that no one believed them did not make the memories any less real. It did not make the nightmares stop. It did not erase the bone-deep certainty that something evil lived in those mountains, something that killed for reasons humans could not understand. No physical evidence would remain except shattered glass, crushed metal, and the traumatized memories of ordinary people who encountered something that should not exist. The boulders scattered on the road could have come from anywhere, were not unusual in an area where rockslides happened regularly. The damage to the bus could be explained by impact, and the subsequent fall required no supernatural agent to account for the pattern of destruction. Elias Croft's photographs, which should have been irrefutable proof, would be corrupted beyond recovery, the digital files showing nothing but static where the creature should have been. And the forest itself would keep its secrets, would show no tracks, no scat, no hair samples, no DNA evidence that scientists could analyze and confirm. The creature would simply vanish back into the wilderness from which it had emerged, leaving behind only questions that had no acceptable answers. This is what really happened on October 6th, when a regional tour bus carrying 16 passengers and one driver took the scenic route through the azure peaks of Washington, and something ancient and malevolent decided they had trespassed too far into its territory. This is the story that should have been front-page news, that should have prompted scientific expeditions and government investigations, and a fundamental reassessment of what species might be sharing this continent with humanity. But it is not that story. It is only a memory carried by 17 people who will never fully recover from what they experienced, who will never be able to make anyone else understand the depth of the terror they felt, who will spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders and wondering if something is watching them from the shadows. This is the truth that no one wants to hear. This is what happened when Leo Vance drove his bus into the wrong place at the wrong time, and a monster decided to kill them all. Leo Vance had been driving tour buses through the mountain regions of Washington and Oregon for over a decade, and in that time he had accumulated more knowledge about these landscapes than most lifetime residents possessed. At 44 years old, he had logged nearly 500,000 miles on mountain roads, had navigated through blizzards and thunderstorms and winds strong enough to push a vehicle sideways, had dealt with rock slides and washouts and roads that seemed to crumble away beneath his tires. He had seen every type of passenger imaginable, from wealthy retirees spending their children's inheritance on bucket list adventures to young backpackers trying to see the Pacific Northwest on a shoestring budget. He prided himself on never having had a single accident on his record, not even a minor fender bender in a parking lot. His safety record was spotless, a source of professional pride that he guarded jealously. Leo was a big man, 6 feet 1 inch tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his uniform shirt and calloused hands that bore the marks of physical labor. Before becoming a tour bus driver, he had worked in logging for 7 years, a profession that had taught him respect for both the power of nature and the fragility of human life. Those skills had translated well to his current profession, where mechanical problems on remote roads required creative solutions, and where the ability to stay calm under pressure was worth more than any technical certification. He had the kind of physical presence that inspired confidence just by being there, the kind of person you wanted in charge during an emergency. Women found him attractive in a rugged, outdoorsy way, though Leo had been single for years since a relationship had ended amicably but finally. He lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Bellingham that backed up against public land where he could hike and fish without seeing another human for days. His face was weathered from years of mountain sun, with deep lines around his eyes from squinting at distant roads and laugh lines from countless jokes told over the intercom system. His eyes were a pale, clear blue, and they had a way of looking at people that made them feel truly seen, truly heard. Passengers often remarked on Leo's eyes, how they seemed kind and attentive, how they made you feel safe. He kept his brown hair cut short and practical, shot through with grey at the temples. His uniform was always pressed and clean, shirts laundered and starched, pants creased, boots polished. Cascade Excursions had standards for driver appearance, and Leo exceeded them not because he was required to, but because he believed that if you were going to do a job, you should do it right. The company logo on his shirt pocket was embroidered in green and silver thread, showing a stylized mountain peak with a river flowing from it. He wore the logo with pride, feeling that he represented not just his employer, but the entire industry of mountain tourism, an industry that depended on trust and reputation, and the promise that adventures would be exciting but safe. Leo took pride in his work because he understood that when people boarded his bus, they were trusting him with their lives. This was not a metaphor or exaggeration. Every time he turned the key and started the engine, every time he navigated a narrow curve with a cliff on one side and a drop-off on the other, every time he checked his mirrors and watched the road ahead, people were depending on his skill and judgment to keep them alive. He carried a mental catalogue of every close call he had ever experienced, every time something could have gone wrong but did not, and he reviewed these incidents regularly as a form of professional meditation. The mountains were Leo's workplace, but also his sanctuary, the place where he felt most himself. He loved the way sunlight looked filtering through Douglas fir forests, the way snow glittered on distant peaks, the way valleys filled with morning mist looked like something from a fantasy painting. He believed that the mountains had healing properties, that spending time in wilderness made people better versions of themselves, more humble and more grateful, and more connected to something larger than their everyday concerns. He considered himself privileged to be part of that transformative experience. The tour he was running that October was a 7-day excursion called the Cascade Wilderness Explorer, a package deal that took tourists from Seattle through some of the most remote and beautiful landscapes in the American Northwest. The itinerary included stops at historical sites, scenic overlooks, small mountain towns, and camping locations where passengers could experience the authentic wilderness. Leo had run this exact route 37 times over the past 5 years. He knew every curve, every mile marker, every spot where black bears might be foraging in the early morning. The road held no mysteries for him, or so he believed. The 16 passengers on this particular tour were a typical mix. There was an elderly couple from Arizona, Arthur and Clara Finch, both in their 70s, who had saved for years to take this trip. They sat in the front seats directly behind Leo. Arthur was thin and bald with thick glasses that magnified his eyes, making him look perpetually surprised. He asked endless questions, his curiosity a mark of someone who still found the world interesting after 70-plus years. Clara was pleasantly round, with silver hair she kept in a neat bun. She knitted constantly, her needles clicking in a rhythm that Leo found soothing, and she had the gift of making people feel at ease. Arthur and Clara held hands constantly, their fingers intertwined with the unconscious ease of people who had been together for 50 years. Behind them sat 2 middle-aged sisters from Chicago, Eleanor and Bridget Keller, who were taking the trip to celebrate Eleanor's divorce. Eleanor was the older one at 51, tall and angular, with a sharp wit and a tendency towards sarcasm that masked what Leo suspected was deep hurt. Bridget was 4 years younger and quite different, shorter and rounder with a loud, infectious laugh. The sisters bickered constantly, but with obvious affection, their dynamic a well-rehearsed performance of sibling loyalty. There was a young couple on their honeymoon, Nathan and Olivia Reed, both 26 years old, both so obviously and completely in love that it was almost painful to watch. Nathan was athletic and outdoorsy, a middle school science teacher who talked about his students with genuine enthusiasm. Olivia was petite with long red hair, an artist who carried a sketchbook everywhere, constantly drawing quick studies of trees or mountains or interesting cloud formations. They had been married for exactly 17 days when the tour started and treated every moment as an adventure to be savored. 3 college students from Portland occupied the back seats, making noise and taking endless selfies. Kyle was the ringleader, a tall kid with an expensive camera and the casual confidence of someone who had never experienced genuine hardship. His friends Madison and Ben followed his lead. Madison had dyed her hair a bright blue that was already fading, and Ben was the quietest of the 3, studying environmental science, but showing surprisingly little interest in the actual environment around him. They treated the tour like a backdrop for their social media presence, constantly checking their phones until they lost service, then complaining about the lack of connectivity. There was a single mother traveling with her 2 children, Sarah Jenkins and her kids, 10-year-old Lily and 12-year-old Noah. Sarah was exhausted in the way that single parents often are, with dark circles under her eyes and the stressed look of someone constantly doing mental calculations about money and time. She had promised her children they would take this trip, a promise made by their late father, and she was determined to give them good memories despite everything. Lily was quiet and artistic, always drawing in a sketchbook, while Noah was energetic and curious, asking Leo endless questions about animals and whether they might see bears or cougars. A businessman named Marcus Thorne was taking the tour alone, using it as a working vacation. Marcus was in his late 40s, CEO of a tech startup, and spent most of his time on a laptop, barely looking out the windows. He wore business casual even in the wilderness, leather shoes, completely inappropriate for hiking, and spoke in terse, frustrated tones during the few phone calls he could make. Two retired teachers from California, Helen and Grace Tanaka, sat together and knitted while watching the scenery pass. They were sisters, both in their late 60s, small and neat with identical short haircuts. They had the kind of synchronization that came from living together for decades, finishing each other's sentences and communicating in a shorthand of glances and small gestures. They spoke softly to each other in Japanese occasionally, their calm presence a restful counterpoint to the more boisterous passengers. Finally, there was Elias Croft, a wildlife photographer in his early 50s who had joined the tour specifically because it went through remote areas. Elias was lean and weather-beaten, with intense blue eyes that seemed to see everything, cataloging details that other people missed. He carried thousands of dollars worth of camera gear and wore clothing designed to help him blend into natural environments. Elias rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when he did talk, usually about photography or animal behavior, he was articulate and passionate. Leo respected Elias's expertise, had learned more about wildlife from him in 6 days than from years of driving through these mountains. These were the people Leo was responsible for, the lives that had been placed in his care when they boarded his bus 6 days ago. In a few hours, under normal circumstances, he would deliver them safely to their destination, would shake hands and accept tips and listen to thank yous. They would disperse back to their normal lives, and Leo would have 3 days off before his next tour, 3 days he had planned to spend fishing. That was how this was supposed to end. That was the plan. But plans, Leo had learned long ago, were fragile things that shattered easily when reality had other ideas. The tour had gone smoothly for the first 6 days. On the morning of October 6th, they broke camp near Winthrop, a small mountain town that served as a gateway to the North Cascades. The air was crisp and cool, carrying that particular quality of high-elevation mornings where your breath mists and the sunlight feels thin but intensely bright. The sky was a deep, saturated blue, promising a perfect final day. Leo performed his usual pre-trip inspection of the bus, a routine so ingrained he could do it half asleep. Everything was in order. The bus was safe and ready. The passengers boarded with their usual morning chatter in good spirits, talking about how they would miss the mountains. The mood was relaxed, infused with the comfortable camaraderie that develops when strangers spend a week together. Leo took his position in the driver's seat, adjusted his mirrors, and began his final drive time announcement. Good morning, everyone. Today we'll be taking a Forest Service road, the old Timberline Trail, which will give us some spectacular views of the Azure Peaks. This is a less traveled route, which means fewer vehicles and better opportunities for wildlife viewing. The road is well maintained but narrow in sections, so I'll be taking it slow and steady. We should reach our lunch stop around 1, and we'll be in Leavenworth by 6. Let's have a great final day. He guided the bus onto the highway, the big diesel engine rumbling to life. For the first hour, the drive was pleasant. Around mid-morning, Leo turned off the highway onto the Timberline Trail. The pavement immediately gave way to packed dirt and gravel, and the road began to climb steeply into the mountains. This was the scenic portion of the route. It was also remote. Cell service disappeared almost immediately. They were on their own. Around 11:30, Leo noticed something odd. The forest had gone quiet. As someone who spent most of his working life in wilderness areas, Leo had developed an instinct for the normal sounds and rhythms of nature. There should have been bird calls, the rustle of small animals, the sound of wind through the trees. Instead, there was nothing, just the rumble of the bus engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. It was the kind of silence that felt wrong, unnatural, as if every living thing in the forest had suddenly decided to hide. A low-level unease made him grip the steering wheel a little tighter. Then the smell hit. It came through his open window like a physical assault, so powerful and revolting that Leo actually gagged. It was concentrated rot, mixed with the sharp ammonia stench of urine, mixed with something else he could not identify, something wild and animal and fundamentally wrong. His eyes watered and his stomach lurched. He quickly rolled up his window, but the smell had already invaded the bus. "Oh my God, what is that?" Eleanor Keller cried out, covering her nose and mouth with her hand. "Smells like something died," Elias Croft observed, though his expression was puzzled. "But I've never smelled anything quite like that. It's different somehow." "Sorry about that, folks," Leo said over the intercom, trying to sound calm. "We must be near a deceased animal. I'll get us away from this area quickly." He increased speed slightly. The road ahead curved sharply to the right, following the contour of the mountain. On the left side, a steep slope covered with pine trees and brush rose up about 40 feet to a rocky ridge. On the right side, the ground dropped away sharply, falling hundreds of feet down to the Whispering Gorge below. A series of wooden posts with cables strung between them served as a guardrail, a psychological comfort at best. The smell began to fade, and then he heard it, a sound from above, from somewhere on the ridge, a deep, guttural vocalization that was almost like a roar, but with an unsettling quality that made it seem partly human. It was loud enough to be heard over the engine. "What was that?" Noah Jenkins asked, his voice high with excitement and a touch of fear. "That didn't sound like any animal I know," Elias Croft said, already reaching for his camera. Leo's mind raced through possibilities. Bear? No. Cougar? Wrong pitch. "Probably just a bear," Leo said, not believing his own words. "They can make some pretty strange sounds when they're—" The first boulder hit the road about 15 feet in front of the bus. It appeared without warning, dropping from the ridge above, a massive chunk of granite. It struck the road with tremendous force, shattering. Leo instinctively hit the brakes, but before the bus had even begun to slow, 2 more boulders came down. One bounced off the road and disappeared over the cliff. The other struck the left front corner of the bus with a sound like a bomb going off. The impact was catastrophic. The boulder crushed the left front corner, destroying the wheel well, shredding the tire, and partially collapsing the frame. The windshield exploded in a shower of safety glass. Leo felt something hit his head, hard, and his vision dimmed and tunneled. He was aware of screaming, of the horrible grinding sound of damaged metal, of the bus lurching violently to the right. The bus tilted, the destroyed left wheel causing it to pull hard toward the cliff edge. Another boulder crashed down, this one hitting the roof near the back. The bus was sliding now, the functional wheels not enough to provide proper control. Leo could see the wooden posts of the guardrail approaching. He tried to brake harder, but it was too late. These were being thrown, aimed, directed with purpose. Through the shattered windshield, Leo caught a glimpse of movement on the ridge above. Something massive and dark, upright like a man, but far too large to be human. The bus hit the guardrail, and the rotted wooden posts snapped like twigs. The front of the bus went over the edge. Leo felt the floor tilt forward, felt gravity take hold, and experienced a moment of absolute clarity. They were going to die. Then the bus stopped. The rear wheels had caught on something, a slight rise in the ground. The bus hung balanced on the edge, the front end extending out over empty space, the rear end still on solid ground, but barely. The angle was severe. Leo could see straight down through the missing windshield to the river far below. The drop was at least 500 feet. The bus creaked and groaned, every sound suggesting that at any moment the balance might shift and they would plunge. The screaming inside the bus was constant. Leo's head was bleeding badly, but he had to act. "Nobody move," Leo said, his voice weak. "Stay still. Don't move forward." Through the broken windows came that smell again, even stronger now, and with it, a sound. Heavy footsteps on gravel coming down from the ridge. Leo turned his head, fighting the pain and dizziness, and saw it clearly for the first time. It was standing about 20 feet away on the road behind the bus. The creature was enormous, perhaps 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur. Its body was massively built, with shoulders broader than any human's and arms that hung past its knees. The face was the worst part. It was ape-like, but wrong, with a pronounced brow ridge, a flat nose, and a mouth full of teeth that looked too sharp. The eyes were small and dark, and held an intelligence that was purely predatory. As Leo watched in frozen horror, the creature lifted another boulder from the roadside, a piece of granite that must have weighed 100 pounds. It lifted it easily. It was going to throw the boulder into the bus. It was going to finish what it had started. "Everyone to the back!" Leo screamed, finding his voice at last. "Get to the back of the bus right now! Emergency exit! Get out!" His words broke through the paralysis of fear. People started moving, scrambling over seats, pushing toward the rear. Kyle was already at the emergency exit, kicking at the door until it flew open. The sudden movement caused the bus to rock, tilting a few more inches toward the drop. The creature threw the boulder. It flew through the air with deadly accuracy, striking the side of the bus near the middle. The impact caved in the metal wall, crushing a row of seats and sending passengers sprawling. Sarah Jenkins screamed as the boulder passed within inches of her daughter Lily. But the main effect of the impact was to rock the bus violently, shifting its precarious balance. Leo could feel it happening, could feel the inevitable mechanical process as the weight distribution passed the tipping point. He grabbed Arthur Finch, the elderly man nearest to him, and literally threw him toward the back of the bus. Clara was right behind. Eleanor and Bridget Keller were helping Sarah get her kids out. Marcus Thorne had his laptop clutched to his chest, his face blank with shock. Helen and Grace Tanaka were helping Olivia Reed, who had twisted her ankle. Elias Croft was not moving toward the exit. Instead, he was at a side window, his camera raised, photographing the creature. His hands were remarkably steady. Leo wanted to scream at him to run, but there was no time. The creature was approaching the bus, moving with a strange rolling gait. It made a sound, that same deep guttural vocalization, but closer now, loud enough that Leo could feel it vibrate in his chest. It reached for another boulder. Nathan Reed got the emergency exit in the roof open. He started pulling people up and out. The bus tilted further. Leo could hear grinding noises from underneath, metal scraping on rock. Leo pushed the Tanaka sisters toward the exit, then grabbed Marcus Thorne and shoved him hard. Only a handful of people were left inside now. Elias Croft was still at the window. Leo ran toward him, grabbed his collar, and physically dragged him back. "Are you insane?" Leo shouted. "Move!" They staggered toward the rear together. The bus lurched again, a sickening drop of several inches. Through the windows, Leo could see that the front wheels were now completely over the edge. They had seconds. Another boulder hit, this one striking the front of the bus where Leo had been sitting moments before. The impact provided a final, definitive push. The bus began to tip forward in earnest. Leo pulled himself and Elias toward the rear with every ounce of strength he possessed. The bus was nearly vertical now, a tube of metal and glass tumbling into empty space. He could see the emergency exit above him. Hands were reaching down, Nathan and Kyle screaming at them to jump. Leo got his feet on a seat back, pushed off, grabbed the frame of the emergency exit with one hand while still holding Elias with the other. Nathan caught Elias's arm and pulled. Leo felt himself rising, felt strong hands grabbing his clothing, his belt, his arms, pulling him up and out. He emerged onto the roof of the bus just as it went fully vertical. He got his feet under him, crouching on the angled roof. Elias was beside him. Nathan Reed was holding onto the roof rack with both hands. The bus was sliding backward now, gravity taking it over the edge. "Jump!" Leo shouted. "Jump to the road!" He launched himself from the tilting surface, flew through the air, and hit the gravel road hard. He rolled, felt something in his shoulder tear, tasted blood. Behind him, the bus made a final grinding sound and then fell silent. He turned his head and watched as the bus disappeared over the cliff edge. The sound it made hitting the canyon floor was tremendous. A cascading series of crashes and breaking glass and twisting metal that echoed off the rock walls. Then silence, broken only by the crying and heavy breathing of the survivors. Leo tried to count bodies. 16 passengers plus himself, 17 people total. They were cut, bruised, bleeding, but alive. He tried to stand, made it to his hands and knees and threw up violently. The world spun and darkened. He was going into shock. He needed to stay conscious. Then he remembered the creature. Leo forced his head up, searching the area. Where was it? He saw movement on the ridge above. The creature was there, standing fully upright, silhouetted against the sky. It was watching them, its posture somehow conveying satisfaction, contempt, and warning all at once. It had destroyed the bus. It had nearly killed them all. And now it was just watching. For several seconds, the creature remained visible. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, vanishing completely into the trees, leaving no sign it had ever been there except the boulders scattered across the road and the destroyed bus at the bottom of the canyon. Leo collapsed onto his side, his strength finally giving out. The last thing he heard before consciousness left him was Noah Jenkins, the 12-year-old boy, saying in a small, terrified voice, "What was that thing?" Leo woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The details were pieced together from other survivors' accounts. They had huddled together on the road, treating wounds as best they could. They had no cell service and no way to call for help. It was Arthur Finch, the elderly man from Arizona, who took charge. Arthur had been a Marine, and he organized the survivors with calm efficiency. They inventoried supplies, created a shelter, and established a watch rotation in case the creature came back. The creature did not return, but they could hear it. Throughout the first night, they heard sounds from the forest around them, heavy footsteps circling their position, that deep, guttural vocalization, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always terrifying, branches breaking under enormous weight. The smell came and went with the wind. No one slept. On the afternoon of the third day, they heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a helicopter. Someone at Cascade Excursions had finally noticed that Leo had not checked in. Search and rescue had been dispatched. The helicopter crew spotted the wrecked bus, then found the survivors. The medical evaluation in Seattle revealed that Leo had a severe concussion, a fractured skull, 3 broken ribs, a torn rotator cuff, and significant internal bruising. He was lucky to be alive. The authorities investigated. They found the wrecked bus, photographed it, and tried to determine the cause. The conclusion in the official report was that a natural rock slide had occurred and that Leo had lost control. The bus had gone over the cliff due to structural failure of the guardrail system. There was no mention of any creature. Leo tried to tell them what really happened. The investigating officer listened politely and then gently suggested that head trauma can create false memories. The other survivors told similar stories. All 16 of them described seeing something on the ridge, something huge and ape-like. All of them were essentially told that traumatic events can cause people to interpret natural phenomena in unusual ways. Elias Croft had his photographs. He had dozens of clear, detailed shots of the creature taken during the attack. These should have been undeniable proof. But when Elias retrieved his camera from the authorities, every image of the creature was ruined. The files were corrupted, showing only static or blur where the creature should have been. Every other photo from that day was fine. Only the photographs of the creature were destroyed. Elias ranted about impossible coincidences, about deliberate suppression, No one listened. Leo spent 2 weeks in the hospital and another month recovering at home. Cascade excursions quietly fired him, claiming his injuries made him unfit for duty. The other survivors scattered back to their lives, most of them struggling with severe PTSD. Support groups were formed and fell apart. Leo tried to return to normal life, but normal no longer existed. He could not drive. He could not be in enclosed spaces. He could not sleep without nightmares. He spent hours researching Bigfoot, Sasquatch, trying to find some validation for what he had experienced. He found endless stories similar to his own, encounters where witnesses had been dismissed or ridiculed. None of it helped. The truth was that he had seen something that was not supposed to exist, and he had no way to prove it. He thought about that creature often, about the intelligence he had seen in its eyes, about the deliberate nature of the attack. It had not been random. It had chosen to throw those boulders. What had they done to provoke it? They had driven through its territory, nothing more. And for that, the creature had tried to eradicate them. Leo never returned to the mountains. He moved to Portland and took a job in an office. He cut off contact with the other survivors because talking to them meant reliving that day. Sometimes, late at night, he would pull up satellite images of that stretch of road on his computer. He would zoom in on the canyon, trace the route they had taken, and wonder if it was still there, that creature living somewhere in those mountains. He would wonder if it was watching that road, waiting for the next vehicle to pass through, ready to kill again. The official version of events was clean and simple. A tour bus had encountered a rockslide. The driver had lost control. Everyone had survived by luck. There was no monster. There was no attack. There was nothing lurking in the wilderness except trees and rocks and normal animals. Leo knew better. He had seen the creature's face. He had looked into its eyes. He had felt the intelligence behind that gaze. No amount of official denials or rational explanations would ever change what he knew to be true. There was something in the mountains of Washington that should not exist, something massive and violent and alien, something that attacked without provocation and killed without mercy. And Leo Vance, a simple tour bus driver, would carry the memory of that creature with him until the day he died. He never spoke about it publicly after the first few months. He learned that people did not want to hear the truth. They wanted the comfortable lie. So Leo kept silent. He went to work every day, lived in his apartment, went through the motions of normal life. But part of him remained in that canyon, in that moment when the bus hung balanced on the cliff edge, when the creature stood watching with its terrible eyes. That moment was frozen in his memory with crystalline clarity, more real than anything before or since. He would carry it forever, along with the knowledge that sometimes, in the deepest wilderness, there are things that hate us for no reason we can understand. And no one who has not encountered them will ever believe they are real. Leo Vance knew the truth, and the truth was terrifying, and there was nothing he could do about it except remember and fear and pray that no one else would ever have to experience what he experienced on that October afternoon, when a monster threw boulders at his bus and tried to send everyone aboard to their deaths in the Whispering Gorge.